Hey guys, so today I'll be doing some diagnostic work, specifically looking at my spark plugs. The reason why I'm doing this is because my engine is experiencing some hesitation, poor throttle response, and when I go to the appropriate section in my service manual, so this is the repair manual for the Toyota MR2, I go to troubleshooting for the engine mechanical, and I see under problem engine hesitates, poor acceleration, there's a few possible causes that could cause this problem, and the first one here is spark plugs faulty. Remedy, inspect plugs. So I need to inspect the plugs, see if they're damaged, and to do that I need a special tool. So I need just a regular ratchet. I need this long extension bar to get in and access those spark plugs, and specifically what I need here is a special type of socket. This is a spark plug socket. This size is 5/8. I also have I believe a 3/8. So it's 3/8 drive socket with a 5/8 end. So these are two different ones I have. The interesting part of this socket is that they have a black rubber insert, and this insert actually grabs and holds the spark plug, the end of the spark plug, so that when you finish undoing the spark plug you can actually pull it out because it's very far in there in the engine head. So we'll be using this special tool. You'll need this. It'll come with a standard socket set, or you can buy them separately, I'm sure. Just make sure it has the black rubber insert used for gripping the spark plugs. So let's go ahead and do that now and show you how it's done. So the first step is obviously to disconnect the battery. You don't want to be working on the car when the battery is disconnected. You could short something, you could electrocute yourself, you could damage something. So disconnect your battery first, and then the next step is to remove the valve cover. So your engine may or may not have a valve cover. It's usually just made of plastic, and so it's usually just held on by a couple bolts. So we go ahead and remove all the bolts for the valve cover, and then we remove the valve cover. Now you may have to remove your oil filter to get this off, and then put it back on. So now we have removed the valve cover. We have access to the high tension leads. These are the electrical leads from the distributor to each of the individual spark plugs. So we need to remove these. Now you just have to pull on them and they'll come out. So now we've removed the high tension leads. We have access to the spark plugs. Again, they're very deep set into the engine head, which is why we need the long socket, and we need this 5/8 socket, or spark plug socket. And so all we do is we just go in. We can feel it when it gets to the spark plug, and then the spark plug has a fair amount of threads on it, so you're going to have to undo it for a while. And then when it's done, it's not done yet. When it's done, the spark plug will come out with the socket, and this is why we have that black rubber piece in there. This actually grabs onto the end of the spark plug and allows us to pull it out from this deep set hole. So now we've pulled out the first one, the first cylinder, and so we're going to pull out each one after the other, and we're going to place them in order so we don't forget which spark plug corresponds to which cylinder. And this is because we want to diagnose each cylinder individually. So we want to inspect each plug and see which cylinder is running well, which cylinder is running poorly, and so we need to remember which spark plug goes with which cylinder. And we do this just by arranging the spark plugs in order. So now that we have the spark plugs out of the engine, the next step here is to inspect the spark plugs. So if we go with our manual instructions, we're supposed to visually inspect the spark plugs, looking for any damage to the insulator, any damage to the threads of the spark plug, and we're also supposed to inspect the electrode gap. So the limit here, it says, is 1.3 millimeters. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we have our spark plugs lined up. Number 1 cylinder is on the right, number 4 cylinder is on the left, so they're in order. And we have here a special gapping tool. So this tool is used to measure the gap of spark plugs. And we have both imperial and metric gaps. These are platinum spark plugs, so they shouldn't need to have their gaps adjusted, but it's just a good idea to check that they're not past the limit. So what we do here is we just slide each one of these wire loops through, and if it goes through the gap between the electrodes here, then that means it's larger than that, and once we can't go through anymore, then it's smaller than that. So we have here the largest size, 1.14 millimeters, and that doesn't go through. So the next smaller one is 1.02. That does go through. So it's somewhere between 1.02 and 1.14. The maximum was 1.3, so it looks like we're good with this one. Visually inspecting the threads, looking at the insulator for any damage, I don't see any. The one thing I do notice is there's a lot of oil, so wet oil, on the threads of the spark plug. And I noticed this as well when I was pulling out the spark plug. There's a lot of wet oil, so this is a little bit disconcerting. Maybe there's an oil leak in the engine head, and this is causing oil to pool in the spark plug valley. And this is bad, so we should probably look into this. But it shouldn't really necessarily affect our spark plugs. So just keep that in mind. There might be, if you see wet oil, there might be a oil leak somewhere in the engine head. So that's number 1, looks okay. Number 2 has a lot of wet oil on this one. You can see coming off here, just a ton of oil. So we're going to inspect the head later, checking the gap. So we just have to make sure it's not bigger than 1.14. It's not. Good. Next. Again, oil on this one as well. Quite a bit. Is it bigger than 1.14? Nope. Looks okay. Next. This is cylinder number 4. Nope. Good. So they look okay. So it's probably not our spark plugs. They do have some carbon fouling. This is to be expected, there's combustion going on. They don't look damaged, but there is a lot of oil on them, so there might be some oil fouling, which is causing it to run, kind of crappy. So we're going to inspect the head and see if we can find an oil leak. So we're going to go ahead and reinstall the spark plugs in the engine head. Before we do that though, it's a good idea to take a high power flashlight and look inside each of the cylinders and see if you can notice anything in particular, anything peculiar, any differences between the cylinders. I'm noticing liquid oil in and around each one of these cylinders. So I'm suspecting somewhere in the engine head I have an oil leak, which is why I saw so much liquid oil on the spark plug threads. So can't do anything about that right now. I'm going to have to tear apart the engine head to get that, and I'll do that later. But to reinstall the spark plugs, what we do is, again, we still use the specialty piece with the rubber insert. However, we're going to be installing it with a torque wrench. So the manual specifies tightening spark plugs down to 18 Newton meters. So with our torque wrench, we can select that. Okay. And we're going to be using the extension again. And so what we do is sit the spark plug in the end of the unit, carefully lower it into. So what I like to do is just tighten it up. By hand the first little bit. And then the last little bit you're going to do with the torque wrench. So you're going to feel, this is a mechanical torque wrench, it gives a click and you can feel it when it passes the set torque. So there, I felt it right there. You can hear a small click and it gives a little bit, and that means it's set past the torque. So the first spark plug is set. I'll be doing that with each of the spark plugs, putting the same spark plug that I removed back in the same cylinder. And once this is done, we can inspect the high tension leads, put them back in, and then put the valve cover back in and be done. Let's do that now. And actually, just as a quick little trick that can make your life a little bit easier that I didn't show before, is you can install all the spark plugs first just by using the extension and the spark plug socket by hand. And so you just tighten them up until you can start to feel they're getting quite tight, and then you finish it off with the torque wrench. But this way just makes it a little bit easier. You can do each one and then individually, one by one, finish them off with the torque wrench, make sure they're tightened down nice and tight to the specified 18 Newton meters for this car, but check the manual for your own car. Alright. Okay, so now as the final step, we're going to be inspecting the high tension leads, looking for any damage. These are fairly new leads that I purchased, so I'm about 99% certain that they're okay, but it's a good idea just to take a look. And to really inspect them, you need a multimeter. You want to measure the resistance of each of the leads and see if there's any damage to the actual lead itself. But we can just take a look at the ends and make sure that they look okay. And they seem to be okay. No sort of wear and tear, no damage. Again, this is what I would expect from a fairly new leads. And so once we're satisfied with this, we can reinstall them. So let's start with the shortest one first. And what you need to do is you want to push them until you can hear a pop. You can sort of hear a little click, a little pop, and you can feel it sit on the end of the spark plug. There we go. Good. Okay, so now that they're all set, we can put the valve cover back on and retighten the small bolts of the valve cover, and we are done. We have just inspected our spark plugs, and they seem to be okay, except for a little bit of an oil leak, which is most likely due to something in the engine head. So good luck and have fun. So as you can see, we've reset the valve cover. Everything's nice and tight. And so just as a final check, as part of this procedure, we can make sure that the high tension leads are firmly on the distributor, because this is what sends the electrical signal to the spark plugs. So if this is not set properly, then the spark plugs won't be getting any energy. So as a final check, we can just make sure that these high tension leads are set, firmly. These ones actually have little plastic tops which hold down the actual lead. So I had one of these break once, and the lead was just flopping around. I was easily coming off. So make sure that these are not damaged, everything is set properly, and that's the final check. You're now good to go.